Good afternoon. Please come forward and sit somewhere close to the front. No backbench Episcopalians, please. Have it about there. Please take your seats. Welcome to all of you. This is our much anticipated clergy panel. I'm going to introduce the clergy and explain the progression of the time we're together, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bishop Shannon McVeigh Brown to actually ask them the questions. So first of all, so you know, it's being live streamed. Ian Lawler's right up there in the booth, and it will be available on our Cathedral YouTube channel if you want to entertain your friends later on. I'm Standard Baker. I'm deacon here at the Cathedral. I'm also archdeacon for diaconal discernment, and well, we'll get to everybody else. There are going to be first of all, exits should there be a fire. The building is built to not burn down, but there's an exit there, there's an exit over there, and the one you came in. Also, there are bathrooms in the south porch and also downstairs. Those of you who are going to be here this afternoon are having a reception in the Parish Hall from 4 to 7. cash bar, lots of appetizers. It should be lovely. Downstairs, in what some of you might remember as the spy room, the nursery, or other things, is an amazing, amazing memory room. So when you get to the bottom of the stairs of the elevator, you'll see pictures of the fire that draw you into the room that has things by category. That is largely the work of Gretchen Galbraith, and I so appreciate it. Yay. I'm also deeply appreciative for our 50th anniversary committee. Another star was Maureen Reese, who has really headed up the setup downstairs, become a bartender, just for an official licensed Vermont bartender. Picked up the booze. It's an incredible team. They've been wonderful. So I think there's going to be three things. The bishop is going to ask questions of the panelists and they will respond. Then there will be time for them to talk to each other and comment, and there will be time for you to ask questions or comment. Just so we get it on the live stream, I'll repeat any question you ask, just so we hear that. So here at the table is Bishop Shannon McVeigh Brown, the Very Reverend Ken Poppy, Reverend Tanya Wallace Cannon, Reverend Canyon Tanya Wallace, Archdeacon Catherine Cook, the Very Reverend Diane Nanscovell, and the Very Reverend Greta Getline, kind of in chronological order, but not completely. So I'm going to turn it over to Bishop Shannon. Oh, one other thing. In the back, Julia, would you stand up? This is Julia Ayala Harris. Julia is our honored guest, and she will be preaching tomorrow. She is the president of the House of Deputies of the Episcopal Church. So without getting too much in the weeds, our polity was developed during the colonial times, so we have the House of Bishops, which is roughly like the Senate, and the House of Deputies, which is roughly like the House. The House of Bishops is exactly what it sounds like, all bishops. The House of Deputies is half clergy and half lay, and what we're about, when we're at General Convention, about 140, is that right? Or so from all the dioceses of the Episcopal Church. So, welcome everyone. Bishop.
Thank you, Stan. So here are two questions, and if you would each take 3 to 5 minutes to answer. So please share the core essence or kernel of your time at the Cathedral, and then also state a wish or charge for the Cathedral as we go forward. And I don't know if there's an order. You know, y'all do what you want to do.
Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's my great privilege to be here, but also to congratulate you on 50 years. It's quite a wonderful achievement, I think. I came to St. Paul's in September of 1998. And then 2 months later, we celebrated the 25th anniversary of this building. So that was 25 years ago, and I left 11 years after 11 years from now in 2012. So this might be a bit of a cognitive memory test for me. The cathedral had gone through a bit of a rough patch, but there was really a wonderful and a very fruitful interim period led by Molly Como, the vestry, the search committee, and it really was the sense that this place was really ready to move ahead and to move forward with great energy. So I sort of thought that the core, the essence, and the kernel of my time was really that of redevelopment, reshaping the mission and ministry of the cathedral. And in a sense, it was to promote change. So that would be the sort of core and essence of what at least I thought we were about. On one of our retirement trips to visit our daughter Kimberly, who was now in Amsterdam, we did a side trip to Copenhagen, and in the hotel, there was a postcard which I have now kept as a bookmark. And on the front of it, there's a youthful soccer player. They would call this person a football player, but we'll call it a soccer player for here. And the citation is, "Nothing changes until something moves." Nothing changes until something moves. So change and movement, not staying in the same place, was, I thought, the heart of the work ahead of us. I also think of Mark's gospel at the very beginning, how that gospel characterizes the mission and ministry of Jesus. It says something to the effect, change your ways and put your trust in the good news. So change your ways. I think change is at the heart of the gospel. It's the heart of parish and cathedral life. So I think there were three things in place when we came. Soon after this building was built, one was this amazing worship space. It's just a wonderful worship space. And the other was, a few years later, was the social justice ministry of Cathedral Square Corporation, right across the street, and now in many other places. I remember one of the first things when I was here, Sarah Carpenter, who chaired the corporation, took me on a van trip to a number of the places. We didn't see every place, and it was a very, very long day. But it was amazing, that social justice ministry. And the other thing, of course, was the willingness and enthusiasm of the congregation. So I felt that worship and social justice needed to be expanded, and especially I thought they needed to be connected. Out of our intimacy with God and worship and music and prayer comes our social justice ministry, our making a difference in the life of the community, in the world. So just a couple examples. We started a 9 o'clock Eucharist. It really was centered to be child-centered, but as we remember, some of the oldest members of the congregation were regular attendees there. It was also the time that Mark Howe did this amazing work of developing the music program, not only adults, but also the trebles and the canterburies, and made really an important impact on the life of the cathedral. And we also like to move the furniture. Because we wanted us to feel in our bodies the different seasons of the church year and what that meant and where it was leading us and how it was leading us to work in the community. When we started that service, a couple of us who had been responsible were fearful, I think is the right word, that it would just be 2 or 3 of us gathered here in the nave for that liturgy. That wasn't the case. It wound up being the most populated service of the 3. I also think of Stan and Peter preaching in this pulpit one Sunday. And how important that was. It really developed some of our work for civil union action, and it opened the congregation membership in many ways. I think of the impetus for VIA. We were finishing one of our strategic plans, and we thought we were done with a social justice sort of aspect, and then finally, we said, well, shouldn't we get the other clergy and lay leaders in the city to get together and look at this question? And we did, and out of that came, well, this is not something we should do by ourselves, this is something we should do together. And so again, that was the very beginning and kernel of the VIA ministry. And I also remember the Sudanese ministry that some of you will also remember. The House of Bishops' fall meeting was meeting in Burlington. And the adult education that Sunday morning was here in the Nave. And the presiding bishop of blessed memory was chairing it. And there was that article in the New York Times about the lost boys of Sudan. You may have remembered that. And then I think it was Abraham, who had just come about a week before that, stood up and addressed Frank Griswold and said, "We are not lost, we are not boys, and we've never been lost to God." You really didn't need the sermon that day. So those are just some of the things that are on my mind. And you know, whenever anyone asks me about what I used to do, and I begin to describe the ministry of the cathedral, all the various ministries, they're just amazed, and I am too. And I remain grateful for that time that we were here. Now, should we go on to the second question too? Yeah, I don't really have anything for you. But let me just talk about one of the challenges, at least that I felt when we were here, was how to be parish church and diocesan cathedral, and to add on to that, the public urban church. Those three things. And I never felt that we got it exactly right. You know, I would take the meditation center on the road to various different parishes and things like that, and Tanya would take things around, and Mark would take things around, and Catherine was already archdeacon and did things in different places. And I think some parishioners were a little perplexed, you know, about why we weren't at home, why we were developing this Cathedral Without Walls program. And then the other thing was, on behalf of the diocese, I mean, what is the center of this diocese? Is it 2 Cherry Street, or is it Rock Point? And so all those challenges, I think, remained with us, nothing that we ever got quite right. But I think, I'm going to guess it might still be something on your plate as well. Nothing changes until something moves. That's sort of the kernel for me. So,
I would say I have to follow that, but I often followed that, and I got used to it. I should have gone first. My name is Tanya Wallace. I served here as the canon educator from early 2002 until mid-2009, which was a good chunk of Ken's time here. When I think about this era of my life, I think of this place and these people as a place of transformation. And I think of it on 3 levels: personally, as a parish, and as a cathedral. It's so interesting we were thinking the same way. Personally, when I got here, I was 30 years old. And it felt fine then. It was really young. I had been a priest for like 5 minutes, really 2 years, but it felt like 5 minutes. And I grew into my priesthood here. I'm seeing Tom there. My first day here was the first anniversary of Tom's consecration. So he had a year ahead of me, but I feel like we kind of grew together in this place too. I like to say still, when I talk about my life, that I was loved into a fuller priesthood at St. Paul's Cathedral. I learned how to be courageous, and I had the best mentor of my life. I still think of you that way. I still think, what would Ken do in a situation like this? And I had amazing colleagues, and the parish loved me into being, loved Kathy in this place, and watched us become parents. And that was huge. I'm like a little bit teary talking about it, but that move to becoming parents and that excruciatingly difficult adoption process that went on forever, and that amazing little girl who was 4.5 when we left here is sitting in the front row trying not to cry. Rebecca turns 19 on Thursday. And she's a freshman at St. Michael's College, so she's back up here. She came home. This is the altar that she hid under during the Eucharist and popped out from many times. So anyway, that's the personal transformation. I came a youngin' and I left a much wiser priest and a mother, and that's an incredible transformation. As a parish, everything that Ken said I was part of and was honored to be part of, but I got to do it as the canon, which meant I didn't have to be the ultimate sort of backstop for any of it, which was lovely. But what I got to do was focus on what I think of most at that time, which is our program of education for all ages. We developed a program where literally any person in the entire world could come into this place, and regardless of their age and their level of formation, they found a place to land. Where they could be loved and taught and formed into being, and I'm pretty proud of that. And I think especially notable were the small groups that we had for adults, and also I can't not mention education for ministry. Ann Ely was my partner in crime. Somebody said to me last night, "You were like the dynamic duo." We led that group for a lot of years, and a lot of amazing adults came through that and were transformed by that time. And so I think of that time of formation and education in the midst of everything else that we were doing, liturgically, social justice focused, etc. And then as a cathedral, when I think about that time, I will say I was spoiled to be a canon. I was also probably disrupted in a way that I'll never be the same, because never since I was here have I been able to function just fully in a parish. I've always found myself most fully alive when I have one foot in a parish and one foot in the wider church. And so I'm a diocesan leader. I've been serving on the Episcopal Church level for as long as I can remember, and that's where I feel most alive. And I think what we did here, Ken mentioned it, but around civil unions was incredibly significant. I came after civil unions were in place, just after they were put in place. So I missed all the hard work of the folks who were here. But I came into a parish that was like, oh, civil unions are here. Now what do we do? And what we found is that we were the only place in the entire country that had any kind of rights for LGBTQ folks who wanted to move toward marriage. And often people from around the country would call the diocesan office and say, we want a civil union. And the diocesan office would say, call the cathedral. And Ken would say, here you go, Tanya. So I had an inkling of this, but I went downstairs and I looked in the memory room, which you have to go see in the record, and I am officially the priest who did more civil unions in this cathedral than anyone else. I think only because I was the canon here for that period of time, but still, it's something neat. I did more civil unions than I did marriages, and I learned a lot, and I think the community learned a lot from that. We learned how to be radically hospitable. What is it to welcome strangers from some other part of the country? Normally, if they came for marriage, we'd say, oh, you're not part of the parish. No, but we felt like we had a role in this country of providing the space of civil union. I also learned how to honor relationships that had been going on for ages, and not just kind of doing premarital preparation and a wedding, because they've really been married. And so we did a lot of renewals of vows. And we did a lot of creating space for couples to come in and be recognized and honored and loved in this space. And I remember two in particular. One is one of the first ones I did, and I received a death threat. If I went ahead with that civil union, I received a death threat by one of the parents, actually. I remember calling Ken on sabbatical and saying, well, that happened. And he said, call Paul Vandegraff. Now I know it's a felony to use the phone to make a threat. I had no idea before that. And those two young women came without any family, any support, any witnesses. And Catherine Cook, do you remember that? She said, I'll be there. She was a witness. Sarah Gallagher was a witness. We had the police involved, and we did something really bold that day. And they lived happily ever after in West Virginia and have children and stay in touch every once in a while. The other one I remember is a couple from Texas who also came without any family or support. Susan's nodding. And we were like, well, you need witnesses. And so we provided a dozen. Our entire LGBTQ group decided to gather together with them in the chapel as their witnesses and as their kind of bridal parties, if you will. And then we threw them a potluck reception downstairs in the Parish Hall. And I thought, that's hospitality right? That's a way to sort of take part in changing the world around us and not just kind of being parish. So looking ahead, I don't know if I have a charge. I have more memories that I kind of hope that you will kind of join me in remembering and honoring. One is I just need to say that my leaving this place was a difficult time. And I just want to acknowledge that because that was real for all of us in a lot of ways. And I think in some ways it began a period of the cathedral of, let's just say, financial worry. And my sense is that you're not out of it, right? Finances are always a concern. It began a time of real focus on the worry and also a time of shrinking, especially in terms of the staff. And so I've watched that from afar. I've continued loving you from afar, but I've worried with you from afar. And what I want to say is everything I've learned since then is that worry and fear are not of God. Abundance is of God. And God gives us everything that we have, and it's more than enough to do the ministry to which we're called. That's not to negate the difficulties and the worries, but in a sense it's a charge to remind you to remember that we are a people of abundance and not a people of scarcity. And when we make choices from a place of fear, it's not usually a good idea. And when we make choices from a place of abundance, that's where God shows up and works wonders. And so that's a sort of a charge for you that I hope you'll kind of sit into. The other thing I think of from this place is something that has sort of transformed my understanding of church, which is that we, believe it or not, we're a place of pilgrimage. And I think of a number of pilgrimages. One is the Easter Vigil. I don't know if you still do it this way, but I still remember starting in that garden with a new fire and processing the light of Christ into the dark narthex, and there sitting and listening to the stories of God and welcoming the newest Christians, and then moving into the nave and proclaiming Christ is risen, and then moving up here and receiving the body and blood of the risen Christ. That's a pilgrimage if I've ever seen it. And so I started to learn from this place what it is to think of liturgy as pilgrimage and what it is to think of church as pilgrimage. I think the same is true for our journeys, right? We come to this place, we're beloved children of God, whether we know it or not, but we come to this place from this broken world, and we're hungry, and we're hurting, and we are fed and healed and taught and formed and renewed, right? And then what happens after that? Then the deacon sends us forth into the world. Get the hell out of here and go do the work of God, right? And so it's a pilgrimage. Every week we come empty and we leave full, and we're commanded to go make a difference in the world. And so I still think of church that way, and the church that I have been serving for the past 14 years kind of forms our mission that way. The vestry is still working on, we're working on articulating a new sort of vision, if you will. And they're like, we're not sure what it is exactly, but it's something about come here and be transformed and go change the world. And I'm like, I can live with that. One final thing is that one of our small groups met once, and Sarah, I don't see Sarah Howe here, she was here last night, but she sort of said, every priest has one sermon that they preach over and over. And they started naming people's sermons. I was the only priest who was there at the time, but I remember they said about Ken, I don't know if you know this, but they said Ken's sermon is do something about it. And I was like, yep. And that's one thing I learned from Ken and will keep with me forever. And I said, well, what was mine? And they thought about it for a while, and they said, there's more to it than that. And I was like, I can live with that too. So there's more to it than that. Keep unpacking, keep being faithful, keep coming to this place, not in spite of, but because of the brokenness of our world. Keep meeting Jesus here in and through each other and in and through the bread and the wine. And then keep going into the world, because if you don't do something about it, we're going to keep hungering and hurting. But we have all that it takes to change the world. So my charge isn't much, but it's that. Thanks, everybody.
We came for the kneelers and stayed for the music. I was part of a well child clinic that happened downstairs back in the early 70s. Carolyn Kerr was our secretary, and over lunch one day, she introduced me to the Kneelers. The following Easter, I brought my family to see them. My husband is a musician as well as a mathematician, and the music pulled him in. My children, as they grew, as well, were choristers. I am most appreciative for the support of both the clergy and the parishioners during my formation for the diaconate and the years following. I was here when Marcia Martin was ordained the first non-Canon 9 woman priest in Vermont. There were and are so many persons who were role models. The development and the building of 3 Cathedral Square happened while I was here. I can remember sitting with a toddler on my lap as I interviewed persons to see if they were eligible to live there. When we first came to St. Paul's, children were in the church school, never to appear in the service upstairs. One of my early goals as a church school teacher was to make the service welcoming to all, because I noticed the interest of my children had when they attended services. They always had questions, either about the sermon or about what was going on in front of them in the sacristy. I watched BEAM, the Burlington Ecumenical Action Ministry, morph into VIA, the Vermont Interfaith Action Group. I was part of JUMP, the Joint Urban Ministry Project, from about 6 months from its beginning for about 25 years. And can remember when we first started out, one day I was sitting with the person who was there attending the desk, and we had 1 can of tuna fish to give away. But now, I mean, over the years, we grew from 5 churches to 27 churches in the Chittenden area, and we're able to give a whole lot more than that. I remember that we didn't have any lay Eucharistic ministers, and I was visiting a woman named May Hutchinson, Hutchie to all the people who knew her, who lived in an elderly high-rise and was in her 90s, I think. Anyway, she kept saying, "Kathy, why can't you bring me communion?" And so I kept explaining to her the church would not allow me to. "Can't you just do it, you know, and not tell them?" And I said, that I can't do that. And so anyways, so then we started lay Eucharistic ministers, and eventually I became a deacon, but it's kind of strange to remember all these things now, how many different things. And I, having just celebrated All Saints' Day, it brings to mind many saints who formed the astonishing community that is St. Paul's. People like Mabel Mayforth and Maggie Maurice, Addison Hall and Jim Leswing, the Ramseys, just ever so many people. I mean, I could just go on and on and on. But and it was a community that was warm and welcoming most of the time. And that, well, we all have our ups and downs. And during my years here, I mean, there were times of growth, both in numbers, ministries, and activities. But there were also times that were kind of down. But and that's the way it is in the world. And I guess my charge is that we would continue with our work in the community and try to expand that ever as much as we can, because that's where God is working, and we need to work alongside God all the time. Thank you.
I'm Diane Nanskavell. It's a bit daunting for me to hear all the work that was accomplished up until the time I arrived, about 2008-ish, somewhere in there, when you took your first sabbatical.
2010, I think.
10? Yeah, okay. And one of the extraordinary things was I came as a former dean. So there were two deans face to face. And I remember saying to this gorgeous man, I don't know how to not be a dean, but you're the dean. And Ken, with his wonderful calm, said, we'll work it out. And it wasn't just our working out. It was the community's working out. Because this community, in my experience, is profoundly faithful and aware of your own responsibilities as worshipers, as carriers of the message into the world, as organizers, as teachers, as ministers. And that, a number of years later, when Ken left, retired, and Mark Hatch came on board, he said, I have never met a community that needs priests so little. He wasn't saying that you don't need worship, that you don't need sacraments, that you don't need leadership, but he was talking about your sense of empowerment. And that, for me, exemplifies what St. Paul's Cathedral is all about. You are empowered. And so myself as a minister amongst you, found myself free to be profoundly honest with you, to wrestle with you, to explore how we did pastoral care and expand it, because that was one of the areas that I was most interested in and Ken wanted me to help with. And to watch you as you struggled with the question that you're still struggling with. How do we be a parish in the middle of this urban center which has so many visible issues? And I love that you struggle with it still. There's no one answer. There are a jillion answers. There's no one ministry. There are a jillion ministries. Cathedral Square is a miracle. Something that I hope you continue to feed off, because I think it teaches that the idea was timely, absolutely essential. You gathered together a core group of brilliant people, and off it took, and continues to take off. It's not moribund in any way. There are so many opportunities for you to stretch and grow in this environment. And in order to do that meaningfully, coming back here, getting fed intellectually, getting fed spiritually, remembering who you are as community of fellow searchers without answers, daring not to have answers, having the courage not to have answers. That's who you are. That's who I've always experienced you as being. And it takes courage. And It takes curiosity, and it takes communication, and it takes wondering, and it takes prayer. I want to just piggyback on Tanya's experience. She did a whole bunch of civil unions. I came along just at the time that marriages were legal here in Vermont. We got phone calls from all over the country. Ken was not so interested in doing those because he was busy doing others. Diane. It was marvelous because at that point we had Skype. Skype had just begun. So I did marriage prep with on Skype with couples from all over the country. One couple who had been together for almost 50 years. They could hardly say the words, they were weeping so hard. Men and women of deep faith finally feeling honored, supported, and cherished by the church. Maybe that's what I want to say to you most of all. It's easy for us to get discouraged and think the church doesn't have much to offer, but I think we do. We can honor and cherish. Those are qualities that are not that evident in our culture at the moment. And churches are a place where we know we can come and receive that, to be honored, to be treated with dignity, to be held and supported and fed so we can do our stuff in the world. It's lovely to see you all. Thank you.
Before we hear from our current dean, Greta Getline, Anne Guillot we've received a message from Jean Finan, who is not able to be with us. She and her husband Tom are traveling, but Anne is going to read Jean's statement.
Jean asked that I read this so that there would be a female voice reading her words. I won't mimic Jean's voice, but I'm standing over here in the mountains of Western North Carolina, where she actually is. So, dear friends, I wish I could be with you in person as you celebrate the cathedral's 50th anniversary. Tom and I both have so many wonderful memories of our time at the cathedral and in Vermont. To be completely honest, we have not found another church that feels as much like home as did the cathedral, and we miss you. However, we are happy and well settled into retirement life here in Western North Carolina. Tom spends much of his time reading, and more reading, as well as keeping up with the political scene, both local and national. He's still as much of a movie fan as always, though we stream more than we go out these days. Asheville's also a grand place for a foodie like Tom. I spend a great deal of my time in the art studio. After retiring, I began working in watercolor and pastels and occasionally in alcohol inks. I now find I spend most of my time working with mosaics. I also spend time writing. I have a Substack blog called Cold Coffee Writer, where I post weekly. I'm not doing supply work or interim work in churches, though it has been graciously offered to me here in this diocese. I remember an interview I saw with Joseph Campbell many years ago when he was asked what he was going to do in retirement, and he responded that he was going to completely reinvent himself. I think that's what I'm doing now with my work in the visual arts, and it feels very right to me at this time. So that's a bit about where Tom and I are now, but I've been asked to look to the past and my time here at the cathedral. Much of my time at the cathedral was spent on getting administrative and financial issues in order. I was truly blessed to hire Barb Como and then later Jennifer Sumner, which really made the difference in achieving our goals. not to mention that we had great fun working together. I also enjoyed working with Mark Howe, and I learned so much from him about liturgy. I loved the loopy circle he initiated at the 9 a.m. service, and I appreciate that we were able to offer a variety of services, especially the Celtic Eucharist, where we partnered with other area churches. You will hear from Stan Baker today in his own words, but he always worked so diligently to help people understand the role of the diaconate, which I think is especially important in the church today. I appreciated Stan's willingness to be involved in diocesan and ECUSA, or Episcopal Church in the United States of America, committees. The willingness and dedication to serve both in and outside of the cathedral by so many lay people was always inspiring. I think that existed long before I arrived, and no doubt continues today. It was a joy to be part of that. Also, during my time at the cathedral, working with the trustees, we engaged excellent financial counsel with Hansen and DeRemus, a Burlington firm, and purposefully worked to move away from using our endowment funds to prop up operations. Another part of my time at the cathedral was working to support SPY, the cathedral's youth program. Marty Churchill was key in our being able to offer young people both local and international service opportunities, as well as having a lively group of youth participating in worship and spaghetti dinners. One of my most dearly held memories is from my very first Sunday at the cathedral. Silas Brown, then a high school student, was one of the lectors that day. He read the scriptures so beautifully. I can remember thinking that I had landed in the most wonderful spiritual place, and that proved to be true during my almost 5-year span at the cathedral. I will always treasure the multitude of ways that children and youth were included. The other essence of my time at the cathedral was working to develop a vision for what we hope to become as an urban cathedral for the future. I worked with an incredibly thoughtful committee to do that work, and it was at the conclusion that I felt it was time for me to retire. I felt my work was done and the cathedral was ready for the next chapter. I felt the next dean should have the joy of making that vision a reality. Of course, no one knew that a pandemic would descend on us all. The interims that followed my time at the cathedral, as well as Dean Greta, certainly have had to face a different landscape than we had imagined during our urban cathedral visioning work. I think it's a challenging time for churches. The pandemic and all that has followed have really changed us all in so many ways. I think the main challenge ahead for the cathedral is to not be afraid. How often we hear that in Scripture, be not afraid. We are living in fearful times, but I hope the cathedral will take bold chances, both deep and wide, to speak up, to speak out, and to serve the community with great love. With love for each and every one of you, Jean.
Gosh. This is everything's a hard act to follow. But you know me, I always have something to say. My name is Greta Getline, and I'm the current dean here at the cathedral. And I arrived here and started work in May of 2020, which, if you cast your mind back, was 2 months after the world shut down. The world shut down basically on March 13th of 2020, and we moved under the wire, bought a house practically unseen, and had somebody else do the walkthrough for us because we weren't allowed to come up here to, anyway, it was complicated. And so my first 2 years here, year and a half certainly, were spent on Zoom and in hybrid worship in our homes, which was not what any of us anticipated. But there was a profoundness to that I am so grateful for. I met with people in small groups on Zoom, 3 Zooms a day, 4 days a week, over the course of my first, I don't know, how long did I do this? 6 months here, I guess, or 5 months. And I remember when I was telling the bishop that I was going to be doing this, she said, don't you want to meet with larger groups? That's going to, I was like, no, I want people to be able to talk. She said, but you're going to be so tired. I was like, yeah, I am, but that's why you're my pastor, so I can talk to you about that, but I want to talk to the people. So there was just something real about people on Zoom that's different than about people in person, at least during the pandemic. I don't think it's true anymore. But I think during the pandemic, because we were so isolated and so a bit afraid and uncertain, that Zoom created a space where we could really be real with one another. And so I feel like I got to know people deeper, faster, than I ever could have if the pandemic hadn't happened and I had been thrown into the crazy busyness of this place. And so in a weird way, I'm grateful for sort of, not the pandemic, but for the opportunity to meet people in a different way. And plus, remembering names is not a gift that God gave to me. I know people who have that part of the gift that should have been given to me because they're really good at it, but not my strength. And so having people's names on the Zoom thing was perfect. But that also meant that I only met about half of the congregation because there were people who just wouldn't engage in that way. And so people would come to church when we finally reopened church, and I had never met them. And they're like, well, I've been coming here for, 25 years or whatever. I'm like, sorry. I'm sorry I haven't met you, but it was a delight to get to know them. So I think that I want to sort of echo some of what I've heard so far, which is around change that Ken was talking about. We, because of COVID, we had to change. We couldn't do things the same way anymore. And I want to tell sort of two stories about that. The first is that this place was empty, like all of our churches were, for a large number of months. And we did church from Zoom. Eventually, we Zoomed from the space, all of us 6 feet apart with our masks and Mark playing from over there. But it was largely empty. And Mark, in Mark's brilliance, did two things around that, and then we did one bigger thing. Mark created 2 opportunities for pilgrimages in the space. Speaking of pilgrimages, Tanya. And we set up stations and had people come. We had people sign up for a time to come into the space and walk a pilgrimage through the space. And we did one around sort of remembering the space, re-entering the space. And it was so powerful to watch people. I just sort of sat in the back and wept most of the time watching people sort of walk around in this space. We did two of those. But the bigger thing that we did, when the vaccine was developed and opportunities began to arise for people to receive it, in Vermont and in many states, probably most states, there was little consideration given to populations that might not choose to receive the vaccine in the same way as everyone else due to a large mistrust of the medical system, due to fears of being treated differently. And in Vermont, the BIPOC community was seeking space to do vaccines for BIPOC people. I happened to be in my email early on a Monday morning, and there was an email from Debbie Ingram from the Vermont Interfaith Action group, she's in charge of it now, asking if there was anybody in Burlington who had a space where a clinic could be held, a BIPOC clinic for vaccines could be held. I responded immediately to that email and said, I have a space, I have a big space, and I have a parking lot, and I have people. And so the first public event in this building during the pandemic was a BIPOC clinic. If you go downstairs to the memory room, you'll see one of the signs that got left behind advertising this clinic. But we did those every Saturday from the Saturday before Palm Sunday in 2021 until we didn't need them anymore. And sometimes that involved moving chairs once we were back in the space and setting up. But every time it involved hospitality. And I had a group of volunteers that were willing to open the building and just sit in the other room, just in case anybody needed anything. But those clinics were a thing of beauty. There was music, there was dancing in the parking lot, and most importantly of all, people who came in the door saw someone who looked like them, someone who could speak their language. There were translators here. It was beautiful. And it makes me weep when I still talk about it, 2 years later, of what a privilege it was and a deep honor to be a refuge and a safe space for people in Vermont who don't feel safe most days in this very white state. And so, with Mary watching over the clinic, we were very proud of that. The other thing that happened in our time was the George Floyd murder in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And shortly after that murder, I think it was it your vision? Stan came into the office and said, I had a vision. And he said, don't laugh that I'm saying that. And his vision was that we needed to stand in witness to that murder out on the streets. And we started I can't get through any of this without crying. We started a vigil on a Sunday afternoon. We were still in the pandemic. We wore masks. We stood 6 feet apart. We made signs. And we stood out on Battery Street, Cherry, and around the corner to Pearl with our signs for 30 minutes in silence, just with our signs. At 1 o'clock. At 1:21, the bell rang, and we knelt on the ground for 9 minutes. If you've never knelt on the ground for 9 minutes, it's a really long time. And we thought, we need to do this regularly, and our initial thought was once a month, and we invited other churches in the diocese. The bishop was there at our first vigil to join us. Many of those churches are still holding a monthly vigil. But after the next Sunday went by, Susan McMillan, who is sitting here, and by the way is going to be ordained a deacon on December 9th, be here. Susan McMillan said, we need to do more. We can't just do this once a month. We need to be really present to this for as long as it takes. So we missed that one Sunday. The first vigil was June 7th, I believe, 2020. And we missed the next Sunday. But we've been out there every Sunday since, from 1 to 1:30 or 12 to 12:30 in the summertime, with our signs in silent witness until we don't need to do it anymore, which will be a very long time. So those events, the pandemic, the COVID clinics, and the murder of George Floyd really influenced our life here in a really big way. And because of COVID, we had to change the way we're set up. So you'll notice that in the back, there are chairs under the balcony. They're always there for people who don't feel comfortable sitting in with the larger group. And people who come in late who are afraid to sit down in the larger group. We also have a larger children's corner. That was a change too. But to affect that, we had to move coffee hour. Don't ever mess with coffee hour, right? Because that's just a bad move. But it's been fantastic. We have a bigger coffee hour. We can now have a coffee hour after both services. Check that. So there's been a lot of change in my time here. And I feel like you can, that part of my job is to be a change agent and to sort of feel the winds. And I just wanted to tell one more story, actually two more stories. One is directly thinking about what Tanya said about abundance versus fear and scarcity. Some of the parish doesn't yet know this story, but the vestry knows this story. Things were heating up here last fall, getting pretty busy. And I remember waking up one Sunday morning and I walked into the bathroom to get ready and I looked in the mirror and I said, God, I need help. And then I went to church and did my thing. 2 days later, on a Tuesday morning, a certain priest in this diocese walked into my office. Yeah, he's never done that before. We knew each other, but we weren't friends, and he never had stopped by, but just dropped in on a Tuesday morning and said, I'm thinking about my next thing, and I'm thinking I'd like to do something here. And I said, well, what are your strengths? And he named his strengths, and those were the two areas that I needed help in. And I was like, all right, God, if this is, and I had no money. There's no money to pay somebody else on staff. I was like, how am I going to make this work? I said my prayer. This guy walks into my office who has exactly what I need, but I can't pay him. Was it a month later or so, we received an unexpected bequest of somebody that we barely remembered in this place, but left us a decent amount of money. And I was like, all right, we can do this. And so I shared that story with the vestry and said, this is what happens when you're sincere in your prayer and you let the Holy Spirit take charge. Abundance can happen. And so we now have a part-time clergy person on staff doing some work with us. Now it's a temporary position because we funded it only partially out of that bequest. But I just want to, that way of looking at how things can happen if you just put it out there, a lot can change. And then I want to tell one more story about the life of this parish and what happens here. So many folks who have come to us since, and I think it started, this sense in me started sort of with the clinics, is that this is a great place of refuge for people. This parish, this space, this congregation, our worship, our preaching, all of it. The radical welcome that is part of what we do gives people a sense of safety and security that they don't find in a lot of other places, and especially in a lot of other churches. And that's been really important for us to maintain. And as an example of that sort of radical welcome, and I think people are drawn to that. Like there's something, the Holy Spirit, she's always out there, and she's always shoving people around. And sometimes she shoves them to where they need to go, like physically, like you need to go in that building over there right now, right? And when your building is a place of refuge, she takes advantage of that a lot and sends you people that need that. And we have lots of those people here. A week ago Friday, I was hanging out in the office, as I often am on Friday afternoon, and there happened to be a few other people here, which there normally aren't. And one of those people came into my office and said, there's a man out in the vestibule that's wants to make his confession. And I'm thinking, oh, really? So I rolled my eyes in my office, and I went out to meet this man, and there was a beautiful soul, beautiful young man standing there, and we had a great conversation. God was working magic in his life, and he felt the need to start over. And so he wanted to make his confession, and so I heard his confession and sent him on his way. He doesn't live here, he lives in Boston, so I've tried to hook him up with a church there. But when you're a place of refuge, there's something about the place that speaks to people, and they come in. And I think that's one of the most powerful things we have here, is to be that place of refuge. And I am so deeply thankful to be here and to be working with Bishop Shannon. We have done a lot of interesting things together. We've gotten into some trouble, and there's trouble to come. And I feel like I just want to say to the urban cathedral thing, the one question that was asked more often in my interview weekend than any other was, we're still trying to figure out how to be a cathedral. Like, And people, and I would hear stories about, well, we were a cathedral when we did this one thing, and we were a cathedral when we did this one thing. How do we be a cathedral? And what I said, I can't believe you hired me anyway. What I said was, you just be it. You just be it. You just be a cathedral, and you are a cathedral. And I think I'm just going to stop there. I don't really have a charge for us because that would feel kind of weird. We are the charge. We together are the charge.
I wasn't going to speak, but since Gene Finan wrote that I would, I will. But I suggest a slight change in the way we're forming this. I think after I speak, I'd like to ask you, Bishop Shannon, because the thing about Parish Cathedral has come up so much. And also, I love this, nothing changes until something moves. And you've brought movement to us. And we, being the diocese, have not always moved quickly with you, but I think we're learning how. You said something important to the deacons, that disquietude is not a bad thing. We sometimes need to feel that in order to figure out how to move forward. So after I speak, perhaps you could, if you feel, some extraneous comments, and then we'll move to comments and questions from the congregation. I feel like part of my charge, I've been deacon here since 2009 when I was ordained. I was allowed to come back here because Catherine was retiring as cathedral deacon, and Ken Poppy said to Bishop Tom Ely, we really need Stan to come back, and I don't know what happened there, but I got to. After an internship at Christ Church Montpelier, and then in Bishop Ely's wisdom, he said, you know, you've been at the cathedral, you've been in another fairly large church, you really need a small church experience, so he sent me to Calvary Underhill, which turned out to be an amazing experience because it was small, basically run by 4 families, half-time priests, so I got to preach a lot. Morning prayer every other week, Eucharist every other week, and myself and Chuck Bongiorno, Chuck would lead morning prayer and I would preach. It was a fabulous experience, and then I got to come back here. I feel that beyond the incredibly important social justice work that I have a passion for and pastoral care, part of my charge here from the Holy Spirit is the care and feeding of deans. And other clergy. And I've learned to stand back and wait to give advice until asked, to not fiddle with the liturgy, because that's really the dean's job, and to really live into what it means to be a deacon. And part of that is supporting the deans and the clergy. So that's been an honor. I also wanted to make one comment about Catherine, something she didn't say. Soon after Catherine was ordained a deacon, she and Roger went to England, UK, and Catherine was a deacon in the UK long before they ever got around to ordaining women, because that was 1997, I think. So Catherine has lived into the diaconate in a way that many people are not aware of, and I sometimes jokingly but rather seriously say everything I know about the diaconate I learned from Catherine. So, and Hillary, I believe you wrote a thing once about the milk of human kindness, did I get that right? That flowed in your home.
Oh, I think it was social justice was in the oxygen I breathed.
Social justice was in the oxygen she breathed, from Catherine. So, I do want to say too, coming here, when Peter and I first came in the 90s, late 90s, was right a year after Mark Howe came, there was this amazing woman on the altar, Martha Dyson, with the most amazing alto voice. And I thought, if this person is a priest here, I can be here. And that was long before Civil Union. Martha, correct me if I'm wrong, was our first lesbian priest. And then Tanya followed Martha. And so I think this church took brave strides, and that certainly made Peter and me feel welcome. And Ken then invited us, I think within months after we came, to preach because we were then involved in the civil union lawsuit, which was between 97 and 2000. One other favorite memory of mine was, Ken, I don't remember, but 2 women flew in from Alaska, from the bush. Episcopalians who had to take a bush plane somewhere to Anchorage or Fairbanks and then flew here to have a civil union. And they wanted, because they were Episcopalians, and the first thing they did was to go across the street to Macy's, that was then Filene's, and buy the most enormous wedding dresses ever, because, they spent most of their life in flannel and boots. And then we had their civil union in the chapel, and Ken and I spent most of the time kind of working around their wedding dresses. So it was both humor, but it was also amazingly powerful. And those, as you mentioned, those people who came from far away to have their civil unions and then their weddings here was very powerful. Something else that Tanya didn't say is Rebecca Wallace-West, right there, is also Peter's and my goddaughter, and she came up to us once at General Convention. Oh, by the way, Julia, Greta will be a new deputy at General Convention in 2024, and said, I really need godfathers because I don't know what but anyway, the person I have isn't working out. Would you do that? And so we were so honored and still are honored. And now that you're at St. Michael's, where my husband Peter teaches theater, it's sort of, I feel like the world is coming together. So that's great. I remember when Peter and I first came, soon after we came, people here did not think they knew how to be welcoming. And somebody came up to us and said, "We're so glad you're here, but why did you choose us?" Do you remember that, Peter? And I just looked around and said, "How could we not choose you?" And there was Maggie Maurice, who embraced us right away. She never let a stranger come in the doors and leave without being welcomed and embraced. I still have her picture in my prayer book hymnal as sort of this person who knew how to welcome people in a way that was not put offish, but also made them feel welcome and that you could be as engaged as you wanted to be at the moment you were ready to. Then she and Pamela, my member, Vandegraff, right over there, somehow swooped down on us and recruited us to be part of their ushering team. We had ushering teams of 4, so that was really our way in, was to be part of the ushering team with Pamela and Maggie. We were really good. And the other thing that Greta didn't say is we learned so much during the pandemic. And up there, we now call it the booth, there's Ian, you can wave at us, Ian. He is live streaming and recording. He followed Grace, who was our first IT person. Now it's Ian, and our ability to live stream, to record, we have 2 congregations, well, 1, but some of them are at home every Sunday, and there can be quite a few people. And so that ability to live stream, record things, have them available on our YouTube channel has been absolutely amazing. I've learned so much, and I've been so inspired by hearing all of you. I have to say one more thing, and then I'm done. Oh, 2 more. We are very, this is the diaconal part. You'll notice there are some people camping in tents across the street. And the greenway between Battery and the lake. And the downtown clergy have met about this. We are very aware that the 2 greatest needs in Burlington right now are to respond to the epidemic of the unhoused, of homelessness and addiction. There have been many people camping around the churches, shooting up, leaving needles on the ground, without a place to go, without safe injection sites, without access to recovery services. That is our major issue right now, right here in Burlington, and we really are beginning to figure out how to respond, but it's going to be an ongoing thing that we absolutely have to respond to. The other thing I wanted to say, when I came in, I've done a lot of help coordinating this whole thing, and I've had a few times I wake up at 4:30 in the morning, I'm sure the committee has, and think, oh my gosh. But when I came in last night and I saw to the organ concert and people were arriving, I saw Ken, Poppy, and Peggy, and I thought, everything is okay and it's all worth it no matter what else happens. And Tom and Ann, it was sort of like, oh yes, this is what it's about. So Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Bishop Shannon McVeigh Brown, and then we'll take responses from the congregation.
Well, I don't obviously have anything coherently prepared, but Greta reminded me, you just don't know. I mean, it was not easy for me to get a COVID vaccine. And if we had not had the BIPOC clinics here, I don't know when I would have gotten it. And so it was wonderful to be able to go and sit in my chair, and people that were in there were like, what is she doing walking around? And I said, don't worry about it. That's my chair. So I went and sat there, and Jerry Davis gave me my shot. And so I was really grateful that the cathedral could also minister to me in that way. But I will also say that, so I was a cathedral dean for 6 months, and it's a hard ministry to be a cathedral, because you are a parish, you are the church of the diocese, and then there's also the community around. And so how to balance those three things is a difficult thing, because everybody has different ideas about how it should be done. And, you know, some parts are easier than others. And so the thing that I think is important and that I'm really grateful for is that there should always, in a sense, be that tension, that there should be some room for growth and for development and to keep continuing to work at it. And one of the things that I've been especially grateful for is that now that we're able to be in person again, that this is where the cathedral gathers for our in-person convention. And, you know, it's a hard thing to do when there's not people to clean up and to make sure that, and this year we left it nicely.
Yes.
So I was really proud of that. But, you know, there's something really important about people in the diocese being able to come to their church home, which is here, the cathedral, and to learn about how to be more faithful in the ministries that we're engaging in, to be able to see each other in a space together. And so I have, you know, tremendous gratitude to the Cathedral Parish for being part of that happening, and also for Dean Greta for allowing that to happen and leading that charge. That's been a very important part of how we've been able to come out of the pandemic with some strength. And then the last thing that I'll say, Anne sort of noted, and, you know, that I have things to say about fear. And I've said this many times. You know, Jesus and the angels are always talking about don't be afraid. I'm not sure why, because we're people, and it's okay to be afraid as we try new things, because that's part of just the normal experience. And the only thing that, you know, the purpose that fear has as we try to figure out what we're doing is that it alerts us to there are some things to pay attention to, but that those things that we need to pay attention to won't define who we are and don't need to hold us back. So Cathedral Parish, and then I will say also, I guess, the rest of the diocesan household, I'm just so grateful that we've been stepping out of the boat, going closer to Jesus, and moving past those fears and doing new things together.
I know that we've gone beyond our hour, but it hasn't felt that long to me. I think it's time now for questions or comments from any of you. My guess is, how about if we plan to wrap up at 2:30, and then you can check out the memory room and talk to people in person. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Yes. Anthony. I'm just going to bring this to you. That way I don't have to repeat what you said, and the booth will get it.
Thanks, Dan. For those of you who don't know me, I was a sexton here for about 25 years. And When you're talking numbers, I just thought, I wish I'd kept track from the first, but I bet you I moved tens of thousands of chairs over the years. One of the things that stands out most was, do we still do Ministry of Arts here? That there was one time where we had a photographer that did an art exhibit, and he had faces of the street, of the homeless. And he would come in, a couple times a week and make adjustments and take photographs. And he said to me one time, you know, I've been in mosques, synagogues, cathedrals, churches, temples, shrines, and he listed everything. And he said, they don't always feel holy or welcoming. He says, this place does. And I always felt proud to work here. And even, you talk tearing up, that still when I talk to people about working here, I'm so proud. And I remember that when Stan and Peter were civil unionized here, Stan asked me to kind of be around and watch. And I didn't realize, now I'm so much more aware of it, but to kind of watch out. And so I think I was the hired muscle at that. And it was a real honor. I'm glad that nothing happened, but it makes me think too that I was always so honored when we had the civil unions in the chapel. And I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I love seeing women and the diversity here. I'm just so grateful. All of you have been like family to me, and I miss you all.
We'll go to Bruce and then Betsy.
Meredith and I wanted to say hello to Ken Poppy. Ken was our rector in Shaker Heights for 10 years. And we came here today. And anyway, I distinctly remember he and I were joking one day, and one of the things we had said to each other was about management and sales, okay? Well, I used to think that most Episcopalians, and I still do to a certain extent, I think they're in management. They're in management, but I constantly realize that we're getting better at being in sales. This place has done well in sales, okay? And that's what it's all about.
Thank you, Bruce. This is Betsy Emerson.
Hi, I just wanted to comment on Anthony's talk and recognize him for the ministry that he had when he was here. He would take people who were doing their community service and have them help out in the church. And it was a fantastic ministry that he had. And I don't know how recognized it was, but I was particularly sad when he left and that ministry stopped, because it was a very important one.
Others? Okay, thank you. Do any of you at the table have responses that you'd like to make?
I just want to say one other thing about sort of where we are now, for all of you to know and for those of you who are coming back to know. So one of our greatest learnings in the post-pandemic time has been to let go, to let things lie fallow and see what comes up in their place. Because there were things that we were doing here that just couldn't continue after the pandemic. Teenagers didn't really come back to church after the pandemic unless they were singing in the choir. And so as valiant as our youth leaders were in trying to make things happen, it just didn't happen. And so we needed to let it go. And that was hard. But that was one of our first big letting goes. And we've let go of some other things since then and we're learning that when we can let things just lie fallow, God will grow something else in its place. And I feel like that's sort of where we are right now. Maybe even as a diocese, that's where we are, is letting things lie fallow and letting the compost do its work, which is to grow new things.
I want to thank you all for being here. It warms my heart. Please remember, there's a reception from 4 to 7. You don't have to stay the whole 3 hours. It's okay to come and schmooze. And then please now or later go downstairs to the memory room. It's really quite wonderful. Tour the downstairs, tour the upstairs. Thank you for being here, and happy 50th anniversary of this building.